Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're in Volume 3, Chapters 51 through 60. I apologize for my voice. I'm a little bit sick here traveling in Mexico, the place where I'm staying. It looks like I picked up a cold or some kind of sickness, so I apologize for the voice, but welcome to all of you guys, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. The way that we do this program is I invite the students in Zoom to be able to read one of the chapters or multiple chapters as we go forward in our class. After someone reads a chapter, then I will share some teachings on that specific chapter, and then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have related to that chapter. So if there's anyone in Zoom that would like to volunteer to read this first chapter, you could electronically raise your hand. I'll be able to see that and then be able to call on you. And as we go through the class, if you have any questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Vibhav, you'd like to read this one. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Chapter 51, Leading to Hell, to the Animal Realm, and to the Realm of Afflicted Spirits. Monks, the destruction of life, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, the destruction of life at minimum leads to a short lifespan. Taking what is not given, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, taking what is not given at minimum, leads to a loss of wealth. Sexual misconduct, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, sexual misconduct at a minimum leads to hostility and competition. False speech, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, false speech at a minimum leads to false accusations. Argumentative speech, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, argumentative speech at minimum leads to being separated from one's friends. Harsh speech, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, harsh speech at minimum leads to hearing disagreeable things. Idle chatter, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, idle chatter at minimum leads to other disturbing one's words. Drinking liquor and wine, ingestion of substances that cause heedlessness, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to hell, to the animal realm, and to the realm of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human being, drinking liquor and wine, ingestion of substances that cause heedlessness, at minimum leads to madness.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here we've got a discourse from the Buddha where he's helping us see this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result. This is the natural law that the Buddha is guiding his students to be able to awaken to, so that you can make wise decisions that lead to wholesome results, and you can eliminate the unwise decisions that are leading to unwholesome results. This is what he's guiding individuals to awaken to all the way through his teachings. And here he's talking about how each one of these actions, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, leads to rebirth in hell, the animal realm, and afflicted spirits. And then he's actually giving you the thing that if this being is reborn into the human realm, what would happen in this human realm. So when you look at a discourse like this, you can see something here, like he says, destruction of life. And he's saying that if you're reborn in the human realm, after having caused the destruction of life, at the very least, you'll experience a shorter lifespan. And the way that something like this is happening isn't mystical or magical. Instead, if you're killing, there needs to be a certain amount of craving and anger, and of course, ignorance or a knowing of true reality that's in the mind. So this is going to create stress and anxiety in the mind, having these different cravings. And now having those discontent feelings with anger and frustration and all these other things that are occurring in the mind, that's going to put strain and stress on the body. And now the organs aren't going to function as well. And this individual will have a shorter lifespan. So, of course, the Buddha is talking about rebirth in these realms here, but he's not using that as a way to guilt, shame, or fear anybody into learning and practicing his teachings. He's just explaining true reality of what's truly happening so you can see this. So when you, excuse me, very sick here. When you see him talking here about destruction of life, he's talking about killing and continually kill over and over and over again. And sure, he's explaining that this leads to rebirth into the lower realms of hell, animal realm, and afflicted spirits. But it's not like if you do just this one thing that you maybe killed a cockroach, so therefore you're going to end up in hell, the animal realm, or afflicted spirits. He's explaining that this needs to be repeatedly pursued and developed, that the mind is continuing to do this over and over and over again. And while this individual could be reborn in hell, animal realm, or afflicted spirits, they can also be reborn back into the human realm as well. So that's why the Buddha is describing all of this. And when you see these kinds of things, what you should do is independently verify these, because the Buddha is showing you this cause and effect. So for example, let's take something like sexual misconduct here. He's talking about sexual misconduct, and he's saying if you're reborn into the human realm, at a minimum, it leads to hostility and competition. If you've ever had sexual misconduct, and you would know what that is if you studied the 5 precepts using the words of the Buddha, you can see that it leads to hostility between you and other people. Or if you've ever had false speech, which means lying, and you've done that repeatedly, you can see that it leads to false accusations. Or let's jump all the way down here to drinking substances that cause heedlessness, or ingesting any kind of substances that cause heedlessness. What the Buddha is saying is that at a minimum, this leads to madness. So if you've been ingesting substances that cause heedlessness, repeatedly developed and pursued, then you can independently verify this for yourself, because this may be something that you've actually indulged in and you know this to be true. So you can independently verify each individual aspect of what the Buddha is teaching here. In terms of him describing how this leads to rebirth in hell, the animal realm, or afflicted spirits, while we can independently verify the cycle of rebirth, and you may or may not have done that yet, what I suggest students do is they set that aside until it's time to actually do that, which is in volume 11. When we get to volume 11, that's where we'll be able to study a chapter to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. But when you see something like this, the Buddha is explaining to you true reality of what actually is happening. And even though he's talking about this rebirth, if your goal is to get to enlightenment in this life, you're not interested in rebirth. You're interested in getting to enlightenment in this life. So when you see something like this, okay, it's great that the Buddha is explaining about rebirth and how one is reborn and so forth. But when you take a discourse like this, when he's talking about these things like destruction of life, or taking what is not given, or sexual misconduct, or any of these others like argumentative speech and things like this, these are all things that you would like to purge from your practice. You would like to eliminate these, not because you're scared of rebirth, or not because you're worried about that or anything, but just because this is what's going to lead to enlightenment. So you don't have to look at something like this and get scared or feel guilty or shameful or anything like that, but just look at it as a way of like, the Buddha is indicating to you the things that you need to eliminate. And in this particular discourse, you can see you need to eliminate the destruction of life, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, false speech, argumentative speech, harsh speech, idle chatter, and taking substances that cause heedlessness. And now just work on that, because that's what's going to lead to enlightenment. Don't worry about rebirth and all those other things, but just work today in this life and over the next several months and years to eliminate these things from your practice, so that you don't experience these unwholesome results. Unwholesome results being reborn into the lower realms, or any of these other things that he's talking about that occurs in the human realm. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
David, I've always wondered whether the destruction of life is also related to eating. I mean, I think there is a link to like eating meat without even like actual killing. But is that like a lighter connection than actually the act of killing? Like, so if you eat, a lot of people in the world eat meat, on a regular basis. Will they then, because of that, will they have the same effect on their life? Or that's mostly people who do the act of actual killing.
This is any decisions that you're making that's leading to the destruction of life, where you have the intention to do that thing. So yes, intentional killing, for sure, because there's a certain amount of craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind to be able to do that. But yes, you can see that with the ingestion of animal flesh, that your decision has led to the destruction of life. And because of ingesting animal flesh, that's going to cause less health in the body, which leads to shorter lifespan. So yeah, that is the same thing. I just didn't use that example, but you can see that connection. And that's what you would like to go for, is to get to the point where you can see these connections. You can see this cause and effect, or action and result, that is leading to any particular outcome, because you would like to eliminate all those unwise decisions, and then more and more cultivate wise decisions that are leading to wholesome results.
So follow up on that, I guess it's more complicated, but like medical technology has evolved to where people are actually living longer. And so how does that tie in with this particular statement? I mean, people are eating meat, both in the Western world and the Eastern world. I mean, there's a lot of meat consumption now. It's increasing because generally it's seen that countries, as they get out more out of poverty, they increase the consumption of meat in general. So how does that connect to this particular point in this chapter?
Yeah, so if we have medical technology that we're using to keep people alive longer, that's going to in some way circumvent the immediate gamma of this. But still, if someone didn't eat meat and they still use that medical technology, they would live even longer. And the reason why it's helpful to live longer is because it gives you more time to be able to get to enlightenment. If you have a short lifespan, it doesn't give you much time to get to enlightenment. Or if you attain enlightenment, then you don't have as much time to be able to experience and enjoy that. So these kinds of things circumvent each other, but still one is being affected. Now, if you went out and you killed a bunch of human beings, for example, that's going to affect you much more than eating meat, for example. So even though the Buddha is saying here the destruction of life, there's a spectrum of things here, right? And going out and killing a bunch of human beings is very different than walking down the street killing a bunch of ants. You're going to experience different level of gamma in this kind of situation. But what you would like to look to do here is just eliminate any destruction of life that you're doing, no matter whether it's active killing or whether it's something like making a decision to eat animals. You can choose to eliminate that, and that's going to lead to wholesome results in your life.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me see if we have any questions on Facebook or YouTube. Let's see here. Again, I apologize for being sick, everyone. Some impermanence in the health of the body. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere, but let me just check one more time just to be sure. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so let's move on to the next one. Is there someone in Zoom that would like to read this? Chapter 53 or 52? Okay, Yihan, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. Reappear in a happy destination. But here, student, some man or woman abandoning the killing of living beings abstains from killing living beings with rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly. He resides compassionate to all living beings. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after death, he reappears in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. But if on the dissolution of the body after death, he does not reappear in a happy destination in the heavenly world, but instead comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is long-lived. But here, student, some man or woman is not given to enduring beings with the hand, with a cloth, with a stick, or with a knife. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, when wherever he is reborn, he is healthy. But here, student, some men or women gives food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics or Brahmins. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is wealthy. But here, student, some man or woman is not of an angry and irritable character, even when criticized a little, he is not offended, does not become angry, hostile, and resentful, and does not display anger, hate, and bitterness. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is beautiful. But here, student, some man or woman is not jealous, one who does not become jealous, resentful, and feel bitter about the gains, honor, respect, gratitude, salutations, and veneration received by others. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is influential. But here, student, some man or woman is not stubborn and arrogant. He pays homage, respect to one who should receive homage, respect, rises up for one in whose presence he should rise up, offers a seat to one who deserves a seat, makes way for one for whom he should make way, and honors, respects, appreciates, and venerates one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is highborn. But here, student, some man or woman visits an ascetic or a Brahmin and asks, "Venerable sir, what is wholesome? What kind of action will lead to my welfare and peacefulness for a long time?" Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is wise.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. So this is a similar discourse as the one we just read, but it's kind of the flip side. The Buddha is explaining the things that lead to this improved rebirth. If you were, say, in the lower realm or something like that, or if you were in this human realm and you would like to be reborn into the heavenly realm, he's explaining how to do that. But remember, rebirth into the heavenly realm is not ideal. Those beings are oftentimes complacent. They're experiencing exclusively pleasant feelings. They're still in the cycle of rebirth and they need to escape out of it, but they oftentimes are complacent because of those pleasant feelings. In the human realm, we experience pleasant feelings, painful feelings, in neither painful nor pleasant. So we tend to be motivated and interested to get to enlightenment, where the heavenly beings don't tend to do that. So while the Buddha is explaining here certain decisions that you can make that could lead to rebirth in the heavenly realm, I don't suggest you make that your goal. That's not the goal of the teachings of the Buddha, but instead your goal is to get to enlightenment in this life. So again, you can use this discourse similarly as the last one. setting the cycle of rebirth aside, because if you're interested in getting to enlightenment, then you're not interested in rebirth anywhere. But the same things that lead to rebirth in the heavenly realm are the same things that you need to be able to do in this life in order to actually get to enlightenment. The same things that lead to rebirth into the lower realms, those are the things that you would like to eliminate from your practice. So here the Buddha is talking again about eliminating killing. So that's one thing we know that we need to be able to do. Eliminate injuring other beings. We know we need to do that. Here he's talking about giving gifts to ascetics or Brahmins. These are people who are sharing the teachings. So this is a practice of generosity to produce merit. That's going to help you eliminate craving, desire, attachment, and then that'll help you get closer to enlightenment. Here he's talking about eliminating anger and irritableness and hatred and bitterness. You know, you need to be able to do that, not because you're necessarily interested in being reborn in heaven, but because that's what's going to lead to enlightenment. Same thing here. He talks about eliminating jealousy, especially when other people are being honored and respected, that's going to lead to this rebirth in heaven. But again, you're not interested in being reborn there. You're interested in getting to enlightenment. So these are the same things that are going to lead to the enlightened mental state. Here he talks about eliminating stubbornness and arrogance. So that needs to be accomplished. And he explains some details about how to actually do that. And then ultimately he gets to this one where he talks about cultivating wisdom. And this is how he suggests that you do that, is by talking to people who understand the teachings and asking them questions. And he says, yes, if you're reborn, you could be reborn in the heavenly realm. And if you come back to the human state, that you would be wise. But ultimately, this is the same thing that's going to lead to enlightenment in this life, is by talking to people about what is wholesome, what leads to your welfare and peacefulness. This is the path to enlightenment. Oftentimes, the Buddha will leave the most important thing for last, right? Because if it wasn't for you cultivating wisdom of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome, you wouldn't actually understand all these other ones that are up here. So you can use a discourse like this to learn what to cultivate in your practice and how to develop your practice to get closer to enlightenment. Set aside rebirth and anything like that. But the Buddha is explaining this cause and effect in this natural law of karma, and it is helpful to understand that. But your ultimate goal is to get to enlightenment in this life. Any questions on this discourse? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move off to the next one. The next one is chapter 53. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, looks like Leo's volunteering. Go ahead, sir.
8 worldly conditions: gain and loss, shame and fame, blame and praise, pleasure and pain. These conditions that people meet are impermanent, transient, and subject to change. A wise and mindful person knows them and sees that they are subject to change. Desirable conditions don't excite his mind, nor is he saddened by undesirable conditions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, sir. So here the Buddha is talking about 8 things that can happen in the world, and 4 of them are desirable and 4 of them are undesirable. Here in the book, you guys know that I have words down here to be able to help you guys. And I created this chart to be able to help you guys see the desirable conditions of gain, fame, praise, and pleasure. And when someone's experiencing those in your day-to-day life, if you have craving, desire, attachment in your mind, you'll get so excited when these things are occurring. Gain, meaning you're like gaining material possessions or wealth or things like that. If you're getting famous, if you're getting praise from people, or just any kind of pleasurable things, you'll get excited about that. But then there's these undesirable things. If the mind's untrained and there's craving, desire, attachment, if you're experiencing loss, meaning you're losing material possessions or wealth, you'll experience sadness. But then there's also shame, blame, and pain. Again, you can experience sadness or any other kind of painful feelings. And what the Buddha is teaching you here is he's teaching you to train your mind to not get excited when you're experiencing desirable things, but also not getting sad when you experience undesirable things. Because anybody who's wise or mindful, as you can see here, the Buddha is saying anyone who's wise or mindful, they actually understand that these things are all subject to change, that these conditions are impermanent, that they're not actually permanent. So the unenlightened mind is going to crave permanence. So let's take the one of gain. If somebody wants to be rich and wealthy, and now they're chasing after that with craving, desire, attachment, as you're gaining things, you'll be so excited. But because that gain is impermanent, you're eventually going to lose at some point, and your material possessions are going to be depleted, or your wealth's going to be, depleted. You might not be completely eliminated, but it'll be reduced to a certain degree. So if you get so excited when you're gaining material possessions, then when you're losing material possessions, you're going to feel sadness. And you need to be able to see the impermanent nature of all these things, so that maybe you, working from the middle way, you gradually work towards improved material wealth and things like this. And you gradually do that without craving, desire, attachment, but you do it through wise decision making. And you don't form your inner feelings based on whether you accomplish that thing or not. That's what's going to protect your mind. That if you're wise and you're mindful, you're going to be aware when the mind's longing, yearning, and pulling towards any of these desirable things, and you can restrain the mind and you can pull it back. In that way, if you don't form conditioned pleasant feelings when you're experiencing desirable outcomes, then when the undesirable outcomes are occurring, you won't experience sadness either. But you need to be able to have the wisdom of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to be able to train the mind to do this. And you need to be able to then practice in the moment. And this is ultimately what's going to be able to help you to move your mind closer and closer to the enlightened mental state. So here, the Buddha is talking about desirable things, and he's talking about undesirable things. By the time you get to enlightenment and you've eliminated your cravings, desires, attachments, you no longer see things as desirable and undesirable, or perhaps we might say agreeable or disagreeable, right? There's certain music that you hear right now that is agreeable to you. You might get so excited, but then when you hear music that's disagreeable to you, maybe get frustrated or agitated or annoyed. But by the time you get to enlightenment and you don't have a craving for things to be one way or another, you can be peaceful and joyful no matter what, whether it's these things that the Buddha is talking about here or any other things, right? So if you have that pleasurable music that's coming through the ears, you might get excited. But if you have that painful things, maybe you see this music as being painful. But by the time you eliminate craving, desire, attachment, you don't see it as pleasurable or painful or agreeable or disagreeable. It's just sound. That's all it is. And that sound is impermanent. And there's no need for you to form feelings based on this particular sound. You can just understand that this is impermanent, and no need to form a feeling based on this impermanent situation, because it's subject to change. And if you allow your mind to get excited, when that condition changes, you're going to end up in the sadness. So the Buddha is just bringing your attention to these four situations that are desirable and undesirable, because you need to have mindfulness and be on guard with your mind. The Buddha talks about mindfulness in different parts of his teachings as a guard, that you would like to use the mindfulness to guard the mind. So if you understand that, and you understand these desirable and undesirable conditions, then whenever these things are happening to you, where you're experiencing gain, fame, praise, and pleasure, you can be on guard. Don't allow the mind to get those conditioned pleasant feelings. And then the same thing when you're experiencing these types of things like loss, shame, blame, or pain, that you're on guard and you don't allow the mind to experience any conditioned feelings. That way you can get to the unconditioned mental states where the mind can always be joyful. It can always be happy. But as long as you're allowing the mind to get excited when the desirable things are happening, then you're going to get the painful feelings or sadness when the undesirable is happening. So you can get to the point where you don't see things this way. You just understand that they're all impermanent, and that you just gradually work towards certain goals in your life. And then you can get to the unconditioned joy where the mind can just be joyful all the time. So any questions here on this chapter? This is chapter 53, titled 8 Worldly Conditions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 54. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, go ahead, Leo.
Deeds with fruit that result in great accomplishment and power. Having cultivated for 7 years a mind of loving kindness, for 7 ions of concentration and expansion, I did not return to this world. Whenever the ions contrast, I reached the plane of streaming radiance, and when the ion expanded, I arose in an empty heavenly mansion. And there I was Brahma, God, the great Brahma, the unvanquished victor, the all-knowing, the all-powerful. 36 times I was Sakka, ruler of the heavenly beings, and many hundred of times I was a wheel-turning monarch, Righteous, a king of righteousness, conqueror of the 4 regions of the earth, maintaining stability in the land, in possessions of the 7 treasures. What need is there to speak of mere local kingship? It occurred to me, monks, to wonder, of what kind of deed of mine is this the fruit? Of what deeds ripening am I now of such great accomplishment and power? And then it occurred to me, it is the fruit of 3 kings, of deeds of mine, the ripping of 3 kinds of deeds, that I am now of such great accomplishment and power, deeds of giving, of mastery of the mind, and of refraining.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the Buddha is talking here about some of his previous lives, and he's saying, okay, all those previous lives, he's saying, what is it to even talk about this mere local kingship? Because he was destined to become a king. He's kind of like, what does it really matter that I was about to become a king when I was already all these other things in the past? And now he's saying, okay, now that I've accomplished this mental state of enlightenment, what are the things that actually led me to those to that accomplishment of enlightenment? What are the 3 kinds of deeds that led me to accomplishing enlightenment? And that's what he's describing for you here, that it's deeds of giving, meaning he practiced generosity. He's helping you to see that the reason why he was able to get to enlightenment as a Buddha is that he practiced generosity to a high degree, that was one of the things that he did that led to his enlightenment. And that's why he teaches generosity as part of his teachings, because if he needed to practice generosity to get to enlightenment, then you would too. What the generosity is doing is training the mind to let go. It's training the mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So you're going to need to build a practice of generosity. Then he talks about mastery of the mind. What he's talking about here is the mental discipline of the mind, where you're practicing right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. That was part of what led to his enlightenment. Without that kind of work that he did in order to train the mind, he wouldn't have been able to attain enlightenment. So there's a certain amount of mental discipline that needs to be cultivated and developed in order to get to enlightenment. And then he talks about refraining. What this is restraining the mind and pulling it back. As if you're riding a horse and you've got the reins of a horse and you're pulling it back. That's what you're going to need to do to your mind. That's why mastery of the mind is so important, that as you see your mind longing, yearning, and chasing after things, you can restrain it and pull it back. So these are the 3 things that he's saying, hey, this is like to a high degree of what led to his enlightenment. And of course, there's other things that you need besides these 3, but he's showing you these 3 because these are 3 important things: generosity, mental discipline, and then restraining the mind. These are 3 things that you're going to need to develop as well, in addition to all the other aspects of the path. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, Vibhav, you have a question, sir?
Thank you. I guess my question is more about some of the wordings here. So it seems to me like from what the text says that Gotama Buddha basically came after 7 eons of contract action. So I guess the Big Bang theory is what he's talking about, and come back after like 7 times the Earth expanded and contracted. Is that what he's trying to say here? I guess that's the first question.
Yeah, I don't know that he's talking about the Big Bang or anything like that, but what an eon is, this is like an immeasurable amount of time. During the lifetime of the Buddha, the highest number that they essentially were able to count to was about 100,000. That's what they were able to count to. They didn't have the word million. during his lifetime. Now we have numbers much larger than that. So anything up to 999,999, they were able to count up to that high. But then anything beyond that, they didn't have the ability to count that far. So they would refer to time as this immeasurable amount of time of this eon, where today we know that the earth has existed for 4.5 billion years. And we can say that because we know what that number is, where they couldn't say that during his lifetime. So he's talking about these 7 eons, which an eon to them was an immeasurable amount of time. So he's saying that after that he was reborn previously, but then there were 7 eons of expansion and extraction where he wasn't reborn during that period of time. But then ultimately he came back into the world.
Thank you. My follow-up question is it says that I was a wheel-turning monarch. So can you explain what a wheel-turning monarch is?
Sure. What a wheel-turning monarch is somebody who's in a position of power that is learning and practicing these teachings, and then they're guiding that population of people through the teachings. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, this would be essentially a king or maybe a queen, someone who's ruling over a population of people, but they're doing so with wisdom of the natural law of Gama. And now those individuals are able to help the population of people to gradually understand what it takes to be able to understand this natural law of Gama. So a wheel-turning monarch is very influential in a community. So while during the lifetime of the Buddha, we might think of this person as a king or a queen or someone like this in the royal position, today we could think about like a president or prime minister or somebody like this, or even if there was like a boss in a large company, we could think of this person as a wheel-turning monarch because there's maybe 5,000, 10,000 people in a company. And now if that individual at the top of the company is making decisions based in the natural law of Gama with wisdom of the natural law of Gama, that's going to help all the individuals that are part of that organization or part of that country if you're a president or prime minister.
So last question on this, and I'll let Samantha ask the question. So there's some text around there were other Buddhas before Gautama Buddha, right? And Gautama Buddha was like he said he's the first to discover the path. So if he was like the wheel-turning monarch, which already understood the path before, I guess it has to be in some other eon, right? Is that what he's trying to say? Or
yeah,
how do people before him coming to the world and explaining the path know the path itself as a wheel-turning monarch?
Yeah, so keep in mind that these are the natural laws of existence, and people can learn those in different ways. It's not just through the teachings of the Buddha that someone will learn the natural laws of existence. So, for example, when I was growing up, my grandmother used to teach me things, and my other relatives used to teach me things that, looking back on those things now, I can easily see those are part of the teachings of the Buddha because he's describing these natural laws. There's some people that I meet that start learning with me that they've actually learned from different mentors and teachers various things that they're already kind of practicing a bit of the teachings. They have just a very little dust in their eyes. Even the Buddha talked about this as beings having very little dust in their eyes, meaning that they don't have very much pollution in their mind because they've been practicing the teachings to a certain degree. So the natural laws of existence can be understood by different people at different times, but it's a Buddha who comes together and they actually culminate all the wisdom and deliver it as a complete package of this is exactly what leads to enlightenment as a complete package. But you can learn little bits and pieces of this at different times from different ways, different mentors and teachers and stuff like this. And you could be considered a wheel-turning monarch due to those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, Samantha, you have a question? Go ahead, ma'am. You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi. Looking at this chapter, it says that 36 times he was Saka, ruler of the heavenly beings. Does that mean that he was previously in the heavenly realm and then was reborn as a human?
Yes, that's correct. That the Buddha talks at different times in his teachings about the different beings that he was, and here that's what he's saying, that he was in the heavenly realm, at least in this situation 36 times. He could have been in the heavenly realm in other situations too, as just, other beings. But yes, he was in the heavenly realm and then ultimately reborn in other different realms. And then ultimately his last life, he was reborn in the human realm. So from that heavenly existence, you can be reborn throughout any number of the different realms. You can go from heaven all the way down to hell, animal realm, afflicted spirits, coming back into the human realm, or you can actually come back into the heavenly realm as well.
Why would he have, what would someone do in order to not progress to the next realm? It seems like being reborn as a human is a bit of a step back. Like, how did he not progress from the heavenly realm to enlightenment?
Beings in the heavenly realm are very complacent because they're only experiencing pleasant feelings. And when you're experiencing those pleasant feelings, your mind acquires more and more central desire, which is more and more craving. So now he could very easily be reborn into any of the other realms because that craving is allowed to continue to grow and develop in the mind.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay. Looks like Vibhav either has a question or you're interested in reading.
I can do both. I'll just ask one last question on this. So, even in Gautama Buddha's case, is the fact that he went through this progression of being the Brahma and being Saka, Indra, the being turning monarch, it's basically his own karma that caused it, and then that karma caused him to be born as a human and gain enlightenment.
Exactly. It's all based in cause and effect. Nothing happens in the world unless there's a cause. That's the only reason why you can get to an effect. So anytime you see anything occurring in the world, it's going to have a cause. Like this sickness that I have right now, there's a cause. The reason why is because I'm here in Mexico. I'm staying with a family and they have a 5-year-old child, and he got sick and he's been sick all week, and I've been spending time around him. And even the other day when he was in the car, I picked him up out of his car seat because he was sleepy, and I carried him into the house, and he was hugging me as I was carrying him into the house. And there we go. Not too long after that, I got sick, right? So there's always going to be a cause and effect. There's certain decisions that we're making that's leading to any particular result. And no matter how enlightened you are, you're always going to experience sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction, because these are impermanents. So you can't escape any of that. So anytime you see anything in the world that's occurring in your life or somebody else's life, it's always coming from a cause or an action that's leading to that particular effect or that particular result. One thing I'll point out here, since you guys are kind of asking questions around it, is this statement right here where the Buddha is quoted as having saying he was Brahma or he was God. As far as I understand, this being God it has been in existence ever since the beginning of time, and it's the exact same being all the way through. I suspect that what he's really describing here is he was able to look out at the world as if he was God, because that being doesn't change throughout time, that this being was a particular being that was the originator, the creator. That being has been in existence all the way up until now and will be in existence all the way till the end of time. This being doesn't live and die and change roles, but this being is impermanent, but it's just not that any one of us could be that being at any point in time.
Okay. And so, sorry, I'm not asking too many questions on this one, but one last question is that it seems that there is in some manner, or because of karma, or I guess world's karma, is there certain times that are there are certain events that are kind of bound to happen, like the coming of Gautama Buddha or coming of Maitreya Buddha at some point of time. Are these events kind of in some way I guess, expected to happen where it's already known to some people or God or somebody that will happen at some point of time in some kind of time frame, or is this something that is unknown and is kind of in some sense written, or because of the cause and effect of karma, is the result of it, or do we know that, or somebody knows that, or God knows that at some point time is going to happen? Because there's text saying that, right, that the Maitreya Buddha will be the last of this eon, and then the next eon there will be somebody else. So it seems like there's already known that to some people, somebody, that this is how many Buddhas are going to be in this eon and stuff like that.
Yeah, so anything that's happening, like a Buddha being born into the world, or a person who's about to become a Buddha is born into the world, this is all from cause and effect. If you're seeing text somewhere that says that there's going to be a Buddha after Maitreya Buddha, that's not from the Pali Canon, and that's just something that somebody has come up with on their own. It's not from the Buddha himself. But these things that are occurring like this, like a Buddha coming into the world, this is also from cause and effect. And of course, God would know this because he is the all-knowing and all-powerful. He knows when these things are going to occur. But also Gotama Buddha knew when these things were going to occur too, because as you become more and more enlightened, you can know what's going to be happening in the future, even though you didn't experience it. But it's not that these things are destined to occur. It's that an individual, whether it's a Buddha or anybody else, because there's other people who can see the future too, they're just looking at a point in time, and there's still cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect that's led to that, but they're able to see that point in time in the future. So a Buddha comes into the world when the world needs a Buddha, and typically the world is in, really big disrepair by the time a Buddha ends up coming into the world. So that's typically what would motivate an individual to be able to come into the world and actually be able to train their mind by themselves without the help of any teachers or guides, to be able to then get to enlightenment and then help the world move past those struggles and difficulties that the world is plagued by.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to just take a look and see if we have any questions anywhere on our other platforms. I don't see anything there. So let's move to this next one. And Vibhav, did you say you would like to read this one?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
An unsurpassed field of merit for the world. Monks, these 8 persons are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverential salutation, and unsurpassed field of merit for the world. What 8? The stream enterer, the one practicing the realization of the fruit of stream entry. The one's returner, the one practicing for realization of the fruit of one's returning. The non-returner, the one practicing for realization of the fruit of non-returning. The Arahant, the one practicing for realization of the fruit of Arahantship. These 8 persons, monks, are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverential salutation, and a surpassed field of merit for the world. The 4 practicing the way, and the 4 establishing the fruit. This is the upright community, composed in wisdom and virtuous behavior, moral conduct, for people intent on sacrifice, for living beings seeking merit, making merit that ripens in the acquisitions. What is given to the community bears great fruit.
Okay, thank you, sir. This is a discourse that I share in all the foundational classes that I teach, that course that I teach very regularly throughout the month and throughout the years. Here, this is the Buddha describing how to cultivate and develop merit for yourself, which is going to help you get closer and closer to enlightenment. Because at the core of merit is the practice of generosity, where you're practicing the giving and sharing of more than is strictly required in any given situation without any expectation of anything in return, such as your time, effort, energy, and resources. And as you're practicing generosity with anybody and everybody, it's helping you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. It's helping you eliminate that stain of selfishness that the Buddha talks about. But when you're directing your generosity towards the continued sharing of the teachings of the Buddha, you're now making the teachings available for other people to get access to them so that more and more people can get to enlightenment. And the Buddha gives guidance on the types of individuals that it would be wise to support. Because if you can imagine, during the lifetime of a Buddha, there were countless people that were learning and practicing his teachings, but they weren't necessarily all practicing them the same. Not everybody was practicing them closely. So it's important to support individuals who are practicing the teachings closely and who are potentially going to be sharing the teachings. That's how you actually develop merit, because then the teachings can be shared in the world and more people can get to enlightenment. So here, when he's referencing the 8 individuals to make gifts to, the stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and Arahant, that's the 4 stages of enlightenment, with stream enterer being the first stage, once returner being the second, non-returner being the third, and Arahant being the fourth, where that is actually enlightenment, when the mind is completely purified and the mind is enlightened. If there's someone practicing for the realization of these stages of enlightenment, then those individuals are practicing fairly closely. And that's why the Buddha is suggesting that you make offerings to them, because when you come close together with an individual who's in one of the four stages of enlightenment or practicing for the realization of those, then you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions and cultivate a relationship and develop your understanding of the wisdom that it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. And that's why down here, he says that essentially that making merit ripens in the acquisitions. The acquisitions are the four stages of enlightenment. So if you're coming in contact with people who are in one of the four stages of enlightenment or close to it, and now you're making offerings, then this is going to help you to be able to also get to those four stages of enlightenment. And that's how the wisdom continues to be shared in the world. And whenever you're making offerings, what you should see is that individual should be using a certain portion of those offerings to be able to help them in their own life, maybe to sustain their life if you're giving food or clothing or water or shelter, medical care, or maybe you're giving financial support to be able to help that individual to sustain their life. But then you should also see that they're giving things back to the community. That's what the Buddha is saying here when he says what is given to the community bears great fruit. Because an individual who's practicing the teachings the way the Buddha taught, that whenever there's any kind of offerings being made, that they're not only using it for themselves, but they're giving back to the community, that there should be a nice center to be able to learn and grow in, that you should see that this individual's offering classes, courses, retreats, that they're willing to spend personal time with you to help you understand the path to enlightenment. Anytime you're supporting an individual in one of the four stages, they're practicing very closely, and ultimately that individual might decide at some point to become a teacher. Not everybody who gets to enlightenment will decide to be a teacher, but if someone is teaching and you're directing your generosity towards the continued sharing of the teachings, then that's bearing great fruit because it's making the teachings more and more widely available for countless people. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter. This is chapter 56. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Yihang, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. People who generate much merit, wholesome karma. Monks, whenever virtuous monastics come to a home, the people there generate much merit, wholesome karma, on 5 grounds. What 5? First, when people see virtuous monastics come to their home and they arouse herds of confidence toward them, on that occasion, that family is practicing the way conducive to heaven. Second, when people rise, pay homage, respect, and offer a seat to virtuous monastics who come to their home, on that occasion, that family is practicing the way conducive to birth in high families. Third, when people remove the stain of selfishness toward virtuous monastics who come to their home, on that occasion, that family is practicing the way conducive to great influence. Fourth, when, according to their means, people share what they have with virtuous monastics who come to their home, on that occasion, that family is practicing the way conducive to great wealth. Fifth, when people question virtuous monastics who come to their home, make inquiries about the teachings, and listen to the teachings, on that occasion, that family is practicing the way conducive to great wisdom. Monks, whenever virtuous monastics come to a home, the people there generate much merit, wholesome karma, on these 5 grounds.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So remember, the Buddha is always teaching this cause and effect, or action and result. He's explaining to you this natural law of karma and how to move your way towards enlightenment and how to get to this enlightened mental state. So here he's talking about having monastics or ordained practitioners, teachers coming into your home, because this is the way that the Buddha taught during his lifetime and his ordained practitioners taught. And there's even people doing that today. You know, I'm doing it right now. I'm sitting in someone's home that invited me here and I'm helping them, but I'm also continuing to teach classes and helping other people too. So this is a way that an individual can learn, is by inviting someone into your home. And it actually helps you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. If you have craving and you're holding on to your home, you can share it with other people. This is a way of practicing generosity as well. So as you're practicing, where you're inviting teachers, monastics, ordained practitioners into your home, it's helping you to cultivate wisdom and training your mind and getting closer and closer to enlightenment. And while in some cases, just like before, the Buddha is talking here about how this certain practice is conducive to heaven, the rebirth is just something that he's teaching because that is actually true and that's the way that things actually occur. But you would like to practice these things in order to be able to get to enlightenment. So here where he's talking about virtuous monastics arousing hearts of confidence when they come to your home, that this is that you have confidence in that individual, that you're not negative and resentful and hostile and bitter and trying to point out all the kind of conflicts or, you know, inaccuracies or things like that. Because if someone's really teaching the teachings of the Buddha accurately, there aren't any inaccuracies. Sometimes when people are learning the teachings, they perceive there to be inaccuracies, but that's just because they don't have full wisdom about the teachings. But if instead of trying to, you know, be vengeful or resentful in the way that you're interacting with teachers, instead embrace this individual, understand that this individual is just here to help you, that they're just interested in helping you to be able to get to enlightenment. And you can have confidence in that person because you can see that they don't want anything from you. They don't expect anything from you. But when you invite them into your home, they're there to help you. So you can have confidence in that individual. And then the Buddha says, when this individual comes to your home, he says, okay, rise up and pay homage to this person, offer them a seat. And this is going to be helpful for you. And of course, he says here about being conducive to rebirth in a high family, but just set that aside because you're not interested in rebirth. If you're studying with me, I guide you to not be interested in rebirth, that you're interested in getting to enlightenment. So even though the Buddha is sharing this, and this is true, instead, just focus on the thing that he's sharing with you that would be wise for you to do. And what this is doing is it's helping you to eliminate any kind of ego or arrogance or pride in the mind, and you're willing to share. And then here he even calls it out very closely, where he talks about when you share your home, it's helping you to eliminate the stain of selfishness. That's the craving, desire, attachment, and the mind holding on. And then here he talks about essentially sharing things with people. Again, practicing generosity, producing merit. This is going to help you as well. And then ultimately, he talks here that when people question the teachings, that you listen to that and that you learn from that. And he has other discourses where he talks about learning from teachers and, of course, having respect for them, but also the teacher should have respect for their students as well. But you're going to need to investigate the teachings. It's not just blind faith that you're understanding the teachings. You're questioning, you're asking questions, but do that in a respectful manner that isn't just resentfulness, hostility, and bitterness and things like this, but instead that you're really interested in understanding what the teachings are, and then you're working to understand those teachings through asking questions and practicing the way that the Buddha taught here. And that's what's going to lead to wholesome Dhamma, because the wholesome Dhamma that you're experiencing here is you're going to become wiser and wiser. The more that you question teachers who understand the path to enlightenment, and you listen to those teachings, and then you reflect on them to independently verify them and you practice them, that's what's going to lead to great wisdom. Because remember, the Buddha oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes he leaves the last one, the last thing in a discourse is the most important. So here, cultivating wisdom is the most important thing that you could ever do in your life, because that's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
So I was wondering, how do we know that monastic is virtuous? Because as we know that the teachings of Buddha have been lost for quite a while, and most people are, if not all, but a lot of people are practicing more like rites and rituals and don't have a deep understanding. So how do we know that somebody is virtuous and who should be like invite or not invite, I guess?
Sure, I'll help you. You just mentioned one of them is that if somebody's doing rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, right away, you know they're not practicing the teachings closely because they couldn't even be in the first stage of enlightenment. So they don't meet that first criteria that the Buddha was talking about in the previous discourse, that someone's in one of the 4 stages of enlightenment. So if you see rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship that's being done, right away, you know this individual hasn't cultivated the wisdom to understand that those things don't lead to enlightenment. But then whenever the Buddha is talking about virtue or being virtuous, what he's talking about is one's moral conduct. So if you understand the 5 precepts, if you understand right speech, right action, and right livelihood, you should be able to see that this individual is practicing right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Not in a judgmental way, but you can be looking at someone's practice to see, are they practicing lying? Are they practicing slander, harsh speech, frivolous speech? Those are the 4 baselines of the right speech. But then you can look further at the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, that they're speaking what's at the proper time, what's true, gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness. You can look at right action and these other things. So you can look at those kinds of things. But also, the Buddha gave kind of some general guidance of how to know whether someone's actually practicing the teachings and whether they're actually either enlightened or close to enlightenment by observing the condition of someone's mind. That he says that if someone's muddle-minded, meaning they're lacking concentration, they're confused, they're stumbling over their words, they don't really know the teachings very well, this is how you know that this person hasn't practiced the teachings. They don't understand them intellectually, so they're not actually practicing the teachings. So how could you actually benefit from inviting this person into your home and gaining wisdom from that person if they themselves don't have the wisdom? It's kind of like, would you be interested to learn how to drive from somebody who's never driven a car before, right? You would like to know that someone's been driving this car for a while and maybe even teaching for a while before you decide that, yes, let me consider maybe taking lessons to drive a car with this person. So if you see someone whose mind is concentrated and focused, having clarity, having good memory, that they're able to articulate the teachings in a very easy and straightforward way, then you know that they've done this training on their mind. Because if you have pollution in your mind, it would be very difficult to speak in a very clear and concise and precise way. And it would be very challenging to explain the teachings because the individual would need to be practicing the teachings in order to be able to explain them. So you should be able to see these kinds of qualities in others in someone who's virtuous.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere, so let's move on to the next chapter. This is chapter 57. Is there someone who would like to volunteer to read this one? All right, Keely, if you'd like to go ahead, ma'am.
Adjusted to a balanced pitch. Tell me, Sana, in the past, when you lived at home, weren't you skilled at the lute, a stringed instrument? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Sana? When its strings were too tight, was your lute well-tuned and easy to play? No, Venerable Sir. When its strings were too loose, was your lute well-tuned and easy to play? No, Venerable Sir. Sana. When its strings were neither too tight nor too loose, but adjusted to a balanced pitch, was your lute well-tuned and easy to play? Yes, Venerable Sir. So too, Sana, if energy is aroused too forcefully, this leads to restlessness, and if energy is too soft, this leads to complacency. Therefore, Sana, be determined on a balance of energy, spiritual faculties, and take up achieving evenness of the object there. Yes, Venerable Sir. The Venerable Sana replied, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So this is a student of the Buddha who's actually a female. She was ordained, and he was guiding this individual to understand the path to enlightenment and practicing this middle way and what's actually needs to occur in the mind in order to get to enlightenment. Is that he's relating the development of the mind to the stringed instrument. And this is a very famous analogy that the Buddha used, and here you can see it in his own words, that if a stringed instrument was tuned too tight, if the string's too tight or if it's too loose, and you pluck that string, it's not going to play beautiful music the way that this instrument is intended to play. But if it's tuned perfectly to the middle and you pluck the string, then the instrument plays the way it was intended to play. It plays beautiful music. And the mind's exactly the same way. That if you're holding on to things real tight, if you're having craving, desire, attachment, and you're clinging, your mind's not going to perform very well there. You're going to experience all kinds of discontentedness. But also, if you're holding things too loose, where there's complacency in the mind, then you're also not going to experience the peace and joy there either. So it's only when you bring the mind to the middle that an individual is able to then experience the peace and joy that is the enlightened mental state. What brings the mind to the middle is the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is the middle way. So as you're first getting started, you need to really pay a lot of attention to the Eightfold Path. Learning all these different teachings is great, getting exposure to all these. But if you don't know the Eightfold Path inside and out, backwards and forwards, up, down, left, right, you're going to really struggle. So you need to get to the point where you know without a shadow of a doubt exactly what the Eightfold Path is. So for example, right intention. You should know that there's 3 aspects of right intention: retention of renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. When it comes to right speech, you should know that the Buddha teaches to eliminate lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. But then in more detail, it's the 5 factors of well-spoken speech: speaking at the proper time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, with a mind of loving kindness. And we could go on and on and on, but you should know each individual one of these steps. And it's important that you remember them in order, that the way that the Buddha taught them, because he puts things in a specific order for a reason. Because you wouldn't be able to practice the teachings and experience the results if you didn't have them committed to your memory. So out of all the teachings that the Buddha shares, I would like to encourage everyone and anyone who's studying to be able to learn the Eightfold Path in detail and remember those teachings. And if you ever need help as you're learning them, maybe after you studied them for a few weeks or a few months, you can reach out to me privately and you can pretend like you're teaching me the Eightfold Path, and I will listen to you, and I will listen to see if you actually understand the Eightfold Path in the way that you are sharing it, in the way that you're recounting it, because the Eightfold Path is what's going to tune your mind to the middle. So the Buddha here is talking about this energy. What this energy is this is the vitality, the ambition, the motivation. What he's saying here is if you try to arouse this too forcefully, this ambition, this motivation, then it's going to lead to this restlessness where the mind is overactive. But also this ambition, this motivation, if it's too soft, then it's going to lead to complacency. So you got to find this middle way where you're not chasing after enlightenment and trying to be so ambitious and chasing after it, but you can't also be complacent where you're sitting around and not doing anything to develop your mind. You need to find the middle way, even with your development on the path to enlightenment. And that's what's going to help you to be able to gradually make your way to it. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move to the next one, which is chapter 58. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
The pleasure of sleep. What do you think, monks? Have you ever seen or heard that a head-anointed Khattiya king, while exercising rule all his life, is pleasing and agreeable to the country if he spends as much time as he wants yielding to the pleasure of rest, the pleasure of inactivity, the pleasure of sleep? No, venerable sir. Good monks, I too have never seen or heard of such a thing. What do you think, monks? Have you ever seen or heard that a royal official, a favorite son, a general, a village headman, a club master, while exercising leadership over the club all his life, is pleasing and agreeable to the club if he spends as much time as he wants, yielding to the pleasure of rest, the pleasure of inactivity, the pleasure of sleep? No, venerable sir. Good monks, I too have never seen or heard of such a thing. Monks, what do you think? Suppose there is an ascetic or Brahmin who spends as much time as he wants yielding to the pleasure of rest, the pleasure of inactivity, the pleasure of sleep, one who does not guard the doors of the sense bases, who is immoderate in eating and is not intent on wakefulness, who lacks insight into wholesome qualities, who does not reside intent on the effort to develop the aids to enlightenment in the earlier and later phases of the night. Have you ever seen or heard such of one, with the destruction of the taints, has realized for himself with direct knowledge, in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, resides in it? No, venerable sir. Good monks, I too have never seen or heard of such a thing. Therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We will guard the doors of the sense bases, be moderate in eating, and be intent on wakefulness. We will have wisdom in the wholesome qualities, and will reside intent on the effort to develop the aids to enlightenment in the earlier and later phases of the night. Thus, monks, should you train yourselves.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. This is a great discourse for anybody who's attached to sleep and just sitting around and doing not much activity. The Buddha is giving you first this analogy of a Khattiya king. Khattiya was a population of people who were very, successful in life, that they were actually practicing some of these natural laws of existence before the Buddha even taught them, that this population of people were very successful and very prosperous. And the Buddha oftentimes points to them and holds them up as kind of like an ideal society, right? So here the Buddha is saying, have you ever seen a Khattiya king, meaning a very successful king that is pleasing and agreeable to the country, meaning lots of people enjoy this king and is pleased that this king is, doing the things that they're doing, that is basically sitting around and doing nothing. They're resting, they're inactive, and they're holding on and clinging to sleep. And the Buddhist students say, no, never heard of anything like that. And the Buddha said, yeah, me too. And then the Buddha goes on and he says, what about a royal official, a son, a general, a village headman, a club master, and so forth and so on? Have you ever heard of any of these people being successful, but yet they're yielding and indulging in rest and inactivity and sleep? And the ordained practitioners that are studying with the Buddha says, nope, never heard of that. And the Buddha says, yeah, I haven't heard of that either. So then he basically relates it to the journey to enlightenment. He says, have you ever known of anybody who's essentially been complacent in their practice, but yet they've actually gotten to enlightenment? And his students say, nope, I haven't seen any of that. And the Buddha says, yeah, me neither, right? So complacency is a hindrance to enlightenment. The Buddha teaches the 5 hindrances. And when you learn about the 5 hindrances, these are the 5 things that are going to hinder you from getting to enlightenment. And one of those hindrances is complacency. If you're dull, if you're lethargic, if you're yielding to just always being inactive and resting and clinging to sleep, this is going to hinder you from getting to enlightenment. When the Buddha talks about complacency in some of his teachings, he's not going into that detail here. He's talking about other things. But there's this one place where he says, essentially what complacency is that if an unwholesome thought enters your mind and you do nothing about it, that the mind is complacent. So if there's resentfulness that comes into your mind, if there's bitterness and hostility, if there's, judgment or measuring and comparing people, and you do nothing about it and you just let it sit there, the mind is complacent. So you would like to be able to cut that off and let it go. Of course, complacency is also choosing not to meditate, not coming to class, not consulting with a teacher, not reading books, not doing these kinds of things, not practicing the teachings. That's all complacency. But even to the level of allowing an unwholesome thought to come into the mind and not doing anything about it, that's complacency too. So you're going to need to be attentive and alert of the mind whenever anything unwholesome is coming to the mind, that you take action to cut it off and let it go. And you'll know how to do that if you're practicing the Eightfold Path. But here the Buddha goes into some details about the things that an individual would practice. So up here, he's talking about the things that you wouldn't practice. But now let's focus here. What he's saying is to guard the doors of the sense bases. The sense bases are the eyes, ears, nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. This is how your mind is fulfilling its central desire. When there is craving, desire, attachment in the mind is experiencing contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself. And with craving, desire, attachment in the mind's going to want things to be permanently agreeable. You're going to want permanently agreeable contact coming through those sense bases. And when you get that, you'll get happy, you'll get excited, you'll get pleasant feelings. But when you don't get what the mind wants, the mind's going to experience the painful feelings. So this contact coming in through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind's going to experience uncomfortableness, displeasure, discontentedness that are painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant. So when the Buddha talks about guarding the doors, what he's talking about here is practicing mindfulness. You can see this in some of his other teachings, that he uses the word mindfulness or awareness of mind to simulate this guard. That when you're walking down the street and you see something that was typically be either agreeable or disagreeable, you need to guard the mind of that. and be attentive to that and cut that off and let it go if there's any kind of conditioned feelings that are starting to arise. Because remember, they're going to start as a bodily sensation, then it's going to become a feeling, then it's going to affect the condition of the mind, it's going to feed the mental objects. So you need to be on guard. Sometimes I give an example of when I was working to eliminate the coffee from my life, I was kind of away from it for like 8 weeks. And I was like, oh, great. I've eliminated this craving. This is so wonderful. I was feeling kind of conceited, kind of puffed up and like, wow, look at me eliminating all these cravings. Look how great I am. And I was walking down the street in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and I got a whiff of coffee because I walked past a coffee shop and boom, my mind was right in there in the coffee shop because I wasn't guarding the mind. Right? I was just walking down the street feeling all boastful and conceited, like, look at me, I'm eliminating all these cravings. And next thing you know, I'm in line getting my coffee, right? Well, what I did when I realized that the mind was doing that is that was the last coffee I ever had. I just drank a little bit of it. But there forward, I realized, wow, you weren't guarding the doors. You weren't guarding these doorways to discontentedness. So for a period of time, whenever I was walking down the street and I would see a coffee shop or a vendor or something like that, I would cross to the other side of the street. I would guard the mind. I wouldn't allow the nose to take in that whiff because my mind was still a little bit sensitive to this particular odor. And my mind was being pulled in the direction of coffee. And then ultimately, when I had eliminated coffee for an extended period of time, I can go into coffee shops. Sometimes students invite me. They would like to have a personal discussion. And we sit down in a coffee shop. They order their coffee. I order my bottle of water or a smoothie or something like this. And I sit there and I can smell coffee all day long. But because there's no craving in the mind, it doesn't get triggered. So in the meantime, when your mind's sensitive like this, you're going to need to distance yourself from the sensual desires, and you're going to need to guard the mind and make sure that your mind is guarded so that anytime you're taking in something that you see, hear, smell, that there's a flavor on the tongue, some physical object comes in contact with the body, or some thought goes through the mind, you're going to need to guard the mind with your mindfulness or awareness of mind. And that's what's going to help you eliminate sensual desire. Then the Buddha talks about moderation in eating, that during the lifetime of the Buddha, they only ate one meal a day. And that was what they were able to do as a household practitioner. You don't need to eat just one meal a day, but you do need to eat in moderation. And that means that you're not gorging yourself or eating out of emotion. If you are angry or sad or frustrated and you turn to food in order to get pleasant feelings, that's not actually solving your problem. It's actually precipitating the problem and making it worse, because oftentimes when the mind's in painful feelings, it will crave something. This is why if someone comes home from a hard day at work, they might turn to alcohol, or they might turn to sex, or they might turn to shopping or some other craving, because the mind, with its lack of wisdom, it doesn't realize what's happening and it's experiencing those painful feelings and it's trying to get back to something that is somewhat comfortable. And the only way that it knows how to do this is try to have a craving and fulfill that craving to get to conditional pleasant feelings. But as soon as you get to those conditional pleasant feelings, those conditions aren't permanent. So now your mind's going to end up right back into the painful feelings again. So if you're experiencing painful feelings, you need to look inward and figure out what are the cravings, desires, attachments that are creating this, so that you can eliminate the cravings, desires, attachments, not long and yearn and go towards your cravings. Because if you long and yearn and go towards your cravings, you're just allowing the problem to continue. So food is one of the things that people will use oftentimes to get to pleasant feelings. So by eating in moderation, not only are you ensuring that you're not eating based on emotion, you're just eating based on what you need, but you're also not putting so much work on the body, because if you kind of gorge and eat a lot of food, this is going to put a lot of strain on the body to be able to then digest that food. So you're going to need to look at what you're eating and get comfortable to the point where you can eat anything and everything. Now, if your body is allergic to certain things and you have an allergic reaction to it, I've experienced a couple of those things down here when I'm working with the Mexican people. Some of them are allergic to a couple of things and they actually enjoy eating that particular thing, but their body is not able to digest it. So in those situations, you're not going to be able to eat those kinds of things. But if your mind is just repulsed by something where you're disgruntled or agitated, or it's like, ugh, I don't like this, then this is something that you're going to need to train the mind to be able to do. So eating in moderation and being able to eat any and all foods is going to be very helpful to help you eliminate your central desire. Then the Buddha talks about being intent on wakefulness. This is having the ambition, the motivation, and the encouragement to get to this awakened mental state where the mind is enlightened, right? So you need to be intent and gradually making your way towards this enlightened mental state. Then you're also going to need to have the wisdom of what are wholesome qualities. These are things like generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. You're going to need to know those wholesome qualities, but you're also going to need to know the wholesome qualities of things like concentration or mindfulness, or you're going to need to know the wholesome qualities of things like compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. You're going to need to know all these different wholesome qualities because you're going to need to cultivate them, because they're actually remedying and eliminating certain unwholesome qualities in the mind. And then ultimately, the Buddha is talking about residing intent on developing the aids to enlightenment. This is all the various faculties that you need, like being able to cut off and let go, being able to observe the mind with mindfulness, and all these other things. So there's various things that you're going to need to develop on your way to enlightenment, and the Buddha is guiding you to be able to cultivate those. That's the way that you train yourself, instead of being complacent and being attached to this sleep. So let me know if you guys have questions. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Samantha's asking a question here in Zoom. By eating any and all foods, does that include meat? No, that's what I mean by, the meat foods that you're actually would be wise for you to eat, right? So if you have eaten meat in the past, you know that you're fine with eating that meat. And now if you're choosing to move to a plant-based food supply, then you know that, okay, if there's a certain fruit or a certain vegetable that you're repulsed by, you would like to train your mind to be able to eat that. Vibhav is asking a question here. What is the importance of using the phrases earlier and later phrases of the day, phases of the day? I didn't see that anywhere, but it must be in here if you're quoting it, Vibhav. Where do you see that?
It's not days, night. The last sentence of the
last sentence.
Very, very last. It'll be.
Oh, I see. Okay, right here.
Sorry, not days, night. It says night.
Yeah. So at nighttime, when you're going to sleep, your thoughts can invade you. This is where the mind tends to be not as guarded, because you're falling asleep or you're just laying in bed, kind of getting used to, getting ready to fall asleep. Your guard can come down during that time. So what the Buddha is teaching you to do is be attentive to the mind, even in those situations where you're dozing off, like you're half awake, half asleep, or you're just sitting there kind of getting ready to sleep and you're kind of laying in bed. You would like to stay attentive to the mind, even during that time, because it's very easy for the mind to have thoughts that invade you during that time. Even waking up in the morning, you might notice this as you're waking up in the morning, that your mindfulness isn't fully arose yet at that time, because you're in the process of getting to enlightenment. Once you're enlightened, your mind is going to be mindful all times a day. But on your way to enlightenment, early in the morning, as you're just waking up and as you're going to sleep at night, this is very easy for your mind to not have mindfulness. This is one of the reasons why people are kind of grumpy and irritable in the morning, that they're having craving for sleep. And now for that first, 20, 30 minutes when they wake up, they're a little bit grumpy and irritable. Their moral conduct isn't so great. You need to be attentive to the mind at all times of day in order to get to the point where you can train it such that it is experiencing enlightenment. An enlightened being doesn't wake up grumpy. They don't go to sleep with invading thoughts and things like this, that they're attentive to the mind all day, every day.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me check our other platforms. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So let's go into the next chapter, which is chapter 59. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Yinghang, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. One who is constantly dedicated. But monks, if a sensual thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while walking, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while walking. If a sensual thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while standing, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while standing. If a sensual thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while sitting, and he does not tolerate it, dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing, he is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while wakefully lying down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So this is kind of like what we've been talking about in these last couple of discourses about having this dedication, determination, and diligence to get to enlightenment. So what the Buddha is saying here is that if a central thought arises, meaning that there's a craving, desire, attachment that arises in the mind, and you feel the mind pulling and longing and yearning towards that, that you need to cut that off. You need to let it go. This is what he teaches you as part of the Eightfold Path, but here he's explaining it in terms of dedication. And you would be dedicated if you were doing that. Or if you had this thought of ill will arising in the mind, anger, hatred, a will, frustration, agitation, annoyance, or even the slightest dislike towards another human being or some certain aspect of your life, you would like to cut that off and let it go, not allow that to stick in the mind. Because if there's any even slightest dislike in your mind, this is coming from craving, desire, attachment. Or the thought of harming, where you're interested in harming another being. If you're causing harm to others, this harm is just going to come back to you. So this is actually the three aspects of right intention, where we practice the intention of renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. And if you cultivate that in your mind, then your moral conduct can emanate from that. But when you're not cultivating the mind to have renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness, your moral conduct is going to be polluted. You're going to make unwise decisions. You're going to have unskillfulness in your moral conduct. So by being dedicated, determined, and diligent, that if you see a central thought, ill will, or harming coming up, that you cut it off and let it go. And it doesn't matter whether you're walking, you're standing, you're sitting, or you're lying, no matter what you're doing, be attentive to the mind. That's what the Buddha is explaining to you here. Here, he's talking about this moral concern of wrongdoing. What he's talking about here is that if you understand craving, desire, attachment, and you understand ill will, and you understand harming and how detrimental that is to your moral conduct and your unskillfulness, and then when you're actually doing those things, it's going to all come back to you, that you'll have this moral concern, meaning that you will be disinterested in doing these harmful things. And that's what you need to be able to cultivate, that you're just not interested in causing harm in the world, because any kind of harm that you cause is just going to come back to you. It's kind of like if you were walking down the beach and the wind was blowing and you kicked up sand, that sand just going to blow right back in your face. So we learn when we're walking down the beach not to kick up sand because it's just going to blow right back in our face. That's the cause and effect. Well, the same thing is true about any of these things that the Buddha is teaching you, that if you allow a central thought or a thought of ill will or harming, that's going to result in potentially having unskillful moral conduct. But even if you don't have the unskillful moral conduct, just that thought being in the mind, it's detrimental to the mind. And you need to be able to have this concern for wrongdoing, that you're disinterested or incapable of this. And that's what's going to help you to be able to cut those things off, realizing that it's unwise to allow central thoughts, ill will, or thoughts of harming to exist in the mind. And now with this moral concern where you're disinterested or incapable of causing harm to others, you can be dedicated, determined, and diligent to cut these things out of the mind. So any questions here on this chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now we have this last chapter for today, which is essentially exactly the opposite of what we just read, but we can read this one. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Leo, go ahead, sir.
One who is constantly complacent. Monks, the central thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while walking, and he tolerates it, does not abandon it, dispel it, terminate it, and obliterate it, then that monk is said to be lacking of effort and moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously complacent and lacking in energy while walking. If a central thought, a thought of ill will or thought of harming arises in a monk while standing, and he tolerates it, does not abandon it, dispel it, determine it, and obliterate it, then that monk is said to be lacking of effort and moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously complacent and lacking in energy while standing. If a sensual thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while sitting, and he tolerates it, does not abandon it, dispel it, determine it, and obliterate it, then that monk is said to be lacking of effort and moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously complacent and lacking in energy while sitting. If a sensual thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while wakefully lying down, and he tolerates it, does not abandon it, dispel it, determine it, and obliterate it, then that monk is said to be lacking of effort and moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously complacent and lacking in energy while wakefully lying down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So this is what I was referring to earlier when I was saying that the Buddha teaches that if a unwholesome thought comes into the mind and you do nothing about it, then the mind's complacent. And complacency isn't going to get you to enlightenment, as you saw that the Buddha taught previously in one of the previous discourses. You're going to need to be dedicated, determined, and diligent. This is a full-time job, getting to enlightenment. While you can make your way to it gradually, slowly, but surely, you need to be attentive and alert to the mind at all times. Not in an obsessive way, but in the middle way, that you pay attention to the mind. And this can be very challenging as you're first getting started because the mindfulness isn't developed, the concentration isn't developed, the wisdom isn't there. There's a lot of cravings taking the mind in so many different directions. But as you develop this more and more and you get better and better at it, it becomes more and more straightforward for you. So anytime you see any unwholesome thoughts come into the mind, it's important that you take action and not allow complacency to set in. No matter whether you're walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, take action to cut off and let go. And that's going to be more easy when you're actually practicing breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity. By practicing those two practices, you're going to be able to train your mind to let go, let go, let go. So let me know what questions you guys have here, if any at all. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to end class by just thanking all of you. I appreciate you understanding that I'm a bit sick here and not able to really talk so well and still coughing and stuff like this. I think the sickness is just getting started. So I'm going to have to go through that, while I'm traveling as well. I'm going to be a bit sick because I'm going to be leaving Mexico tomorrow and I'm going to be heading back to Thailand, be in Mexico City for a night, be in Bangkok for a night. It's going to take me about 3 days to travel back to Chiang Mai. But nonetheless, I'll be there soon and I'll be starting to teach from Chiang Mai again here real soon. So thank you all for those of you guys that read. Thank you for all your questions and your interest to learn. Next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, which is chapters 61 through 70 of volume 1. So you're welcome to attend that either 9 a.m. on Saturday morning or 9 p.m. Saturday evening. This is based in Thai time. And then remember, there's the group learning program. So on Sunday morning, Thai time, 9 a.m., and Sunday evening, Thai time, 9 p.m., I'm going to be teaching the chapter 24 in volume 1. Chapter 24 is misunderstandings of the teachings of the Buddha. There's several misunderstandings that you'll see in the world, and I wrote this chapter to be able to help people understand what these misunderstandings are, and I've done it in a way that is independently verifiable for you. So thank you all again. You're welcome to attend any and all of these classes and courses and retreats, and as you need help, feel free to reach out, and I'm here to help you. Be well and have a lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.
again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.